Yes, you can go ahead and get started. After your presentation, if time is allotted, we will usually just open up the floor to like a small Q&A, and then if there wasn't any questions answered from a pre-survey, we'll make sure to tell you that. But yeah, thank
Okay.
you again.
Yeah, no problem. So let's go ahead and get started. And everybody can see my screen. Can you see the screen ready?
Yes.
Yes, right. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and get started. In the next hour, we have a lot of ground to cover, and I want to make sure that I am able to cover everything. So I will leave all questions to the end, but I want to start from the very beginning. I know that a lot of you are probably familiar with financial aid and maybe have applied for financial aid in the past, but I think starting with, because our institutional funding is largely based on, or your eligibility for institutional funding will be largely based on the March 2nd deadline. So I always encourage you to fill out your application between October 1st and March 2nd. If you're able to fill out a FAFSA, one of the convenient things of the FAFSA is that you have the ability to transfer your information over via the IRS data retrieval tool. We highly encourage students to take advantage of that, because if you do file taxes and you are required to report that information on your FAFSA, you have the ability of transferring that over from the IRS. And let's say that down the road in that academic year, we require that you bring in documentation confirming your tax information. There is a possibility that you won't have to actually turn in documentation because your information was transferred with the IRS data retrieval tool. So that's just a perk of filing the FAFSA. The FAFSA is also available through an app called Student Aid, and it's pretty convenient. So always remember to fill out your application before March 2nd. So in our office, we like to consider our relationship with every student as a partnership. We are here to assist you. We are here to guide you. We are here to encourage you, and we are here to answer the questions that you might have throughout your academic years at UCLA. You know, every student has a financial aid counselor according to their last name. So if you go to our website under the contact us section, you will find that there is a counselor assigned to you according to your last name. I think right now, because we are operating remotely, things are a little bit different than they would be if you were to come into our office and wanting to schedule an appointment with your counselor. But in the future, I think it's important for you to know that in our office, we have a front counter where you can come in and you can speak to anybody who's at the front counter about your financial aid status, and somebody will assist you. You don't have to make an appointment. You don't have to call ahead. But in general, I think it is helpful to know that there is a point person who you can always request to speak to, since they are the folks who will be processing your file and reviewing your paperwork throughout your career, your enrollment at UCLA. Okay. Now, when you applied for admission, most of you most likely went onto our website, because the question is, well, how much does it cost to attend UCLA, right? And on our website, if you were to go on there now, you would find that there's information that we call cost of attendance. This information is really helpful and important to understand, because what it really means is that according to the housing status that you indicated on your FAFSA, or due to the pandemic that we had to adjust for you, this is your cost of attendance. So if when you filled out your FAFSA, you said you were going to live at home and that you are a commuter student, then according to the Office of the President, we have estimated that it could cost you a total of $27,775, right? It doesn't mean that that's how much it's going to cost you. It's that it could cost you if you were to add up all of your expenses in one academic year. This piece of information is helpful because what it means to our office is that this is the maximum amount of financial aid that you can receive in one academic year. Because by receiving this amount of financial aid, all of these expenses would be covered, right? And as you can tell, these aren't exactly meant to reflect your true expenses. This is just what we call a budget that includes potential expenses. But within this piece of information, the true cost is always going to be your tuition and fees and your healthcare. So if all of you are remote learners because you're living at home or you're not living on campus and you're not living off campus, how much does the university cost? Well, then you're only responsible for tuition and healthcare, unless of course you waived your healthcare, your UC-ship, and because you have your own coverage, right? If you were living on campus, then your true direct cost would be your tuition and your housing or your meal plan, right? And a lot of these items are estimates. They're not meant to reflect your actual cost other than tuition and healthcare. So this is going to be helpful in sort of understanding how to read your financial aid notification. Because if you remember correctly, when you all, assuming that you all have received your financial aid notification, one of the very first screens displays what your housing status is, right? So it's really kind of the first step in understanding how your eligibility for financial aid is calculated. And so when you were admitted to UCLA, one of the very first things that you most likely had access to was My UCLA, right? My UCLA is a dashboard where a lot of you are, where everyone actually can access all sorts of information. For our office, the most important is your financial aid notification, right? The second is your Bruin bill, where you can see that the university has charged you for your classes, or a lot of different fees will be displayed there. Bruin Direct. Bruin Direct is the direct deposit system at UCLA where you can elect to receive any excess funds directly in your checking account rather than waiting for the university to send them in the mail. And the fourth feature that is part of our office is the Bruin Pay Plan. The Bruin Pay Plan is the ability, or it's essentially the payment plan offered by the university where they split your tuition into 3 equal payments per quarter. You do actually have to sign up for the payment plan. It's not an automatic process, but this information is available through My UCLA. And I think that the sooner you familiarize yourself with My UCLA, the better, because our office sends all communications through My UCLA. And for those of you who did apply for financial aid and were required to submit additional documentation, you have found that if you were to log on to My UCLA, you will see a list of documents that is required from you. So if you haven't taken the time, by now you should definitely take the time to familiarize yourself with My UCLA. Okay, so by now, because we are so close to the start of the quarter and we are so close to our disbursement, a lot of you are probably familiar with your Bruin bill, right? So like I mentioned before, Bruin bill is the place where you can see a lot of different charges associated with your student account. It's where you will see your tuition and fees. It's where you will see, late fees if you turn in a book late to the library. It's where you will see charges if you go to the health center. It's also where you will see charges if you go to the bookstore and you decide to charge your books to your Bruin account. So it's essentially an account, your account at UCLA. But your account or your Bruin bill can look different in terms of financial aid throughout different points of time, right? So if you were to log on to your My UCLA account right now, depending on where you are in the financial aid process, some of you might see your financial aid reflected as part of your entire accounting structure, because that means that you applied for financial aid, you've completed everything, and it's ready to disperse on Monday. Some of you might not see your financial aid because either you didn't apply for financial aid, you are in the process, or you have missing documents, or a number of reasons. But I think that understanding that your Bruin bill is a changing piece of information is helpful, because the question that I always get is, well, how much is tuition, right? And like I mentioned before, Your Bruin bill will always display your true cost of tuition because it's where the university charges you. So unless you plan to live on campus next quarter or in the spring and you expect additional charges to be reflected on your Bruin bill, you can go on your Bruin bill and say, okay, cool, this is the cost of tuition, 5,558 per quarter. Excuse me, you can multiply it by 3, and then boom, you'll have an idea on what your total cost, direct cost of tuition is for the academic year. The website or the link that you see at the bottom is a link in our website. I mean, it's a web page in our website that has a lot of information about Bruin bill and our disbursement process. So I provided that because I wanted you all to either take a snapshot or find the website and read through the information. And the Student Accounts Office actually has a really cool set of videos that kind of explain how to understand and how to read your Bruin bill. They also have a lot of information about the communications that they will send you throughout the quarter, how to sign up in Bruin Direct, how to sign up for the payment plan, how to grant somebody third-party access. And so that link that you see below takes you, of course, to our website. But within that website, there's a lot of other links that link to some of our campus partners that I think are helpful. Okay, so before we go on to explain how your financial need and how your financial aid awards were calculated, the formula that you see here is really the basic formula that we use to determine your eligibility, right? So we start with the cost of attendance. According to either your financial aid application or the changes that we've had to make because of the pandemic, your cost of attendance is the starting point of the calculation. Your expected family contribution is the number that derives from your financial aid application. So you know that when you apply for financial aid, all of the information that you enter is calculated according to a formula, right, established by either the Department of Ed or the state of California. That formula takes into account your age, your level of education, your income, your assets, the amount of money you have in the bank. Anything that you report on your financial aid application is calculated according to this formula. The output of this formula, cost of attendance minus EFC, equals financial need. And so at UCLA, our office, our goal is to meet your financial need with a combination of grants, scholarships, loans, anything that we can possibly offer you so that your cost of attendance is fully met. But remember, your cost of attendance isn't a true reflection of what it's going to cost you because it's an estimate, right? And I find that oftentimes it's more than what you're truly going to be billed because the question is, how much do I have to pay? Well, if you live off campus or if you live at home, then your true cost is just your tuition because that's really all that you're responsible for at UCLA, your tuition and fees, including your healthcare. So by now, if you applied for financial aid, you submitted your documentation, you received your financial aid notification, and you're asking yourself, okay, well, what does it mean? How do I read this? Because this is a lot of information, right? And it's pretty straightforward. Here's an example of what a financial aid notification could look like. This is after you get through the process of selecting what your housing status is, and selecting if you're not going to attend a specific quarter, you get to this, right? And it looks something like this. On the left-hand side is essentially the list of funding that was offered to you. The very top section is made up of grants and scholarships. The second section is made up of loans and work study. And at the very bottom, you'll find additional funding like a private loan or a parent loan or any other awards that have been reported to our office. Right? That's what each row represents on the left-hand side. Down the center, you'll find that there are 3 different columns that are key because there's the fall, the winter, and the spring, right? So although we award you for the entire academic year, your financial aid will only be dispersed per quarter, right? So the reason is because we need to verify that you are enrolled and that you are still eligible for the funding before we release the following year, the following quarter. And so back to when I said about your Bruin bill, unless you plan to live on campus, it is safe to estimate that the amount of tuition that you are billed for the fall is going to be the same for the winter and it's going to be the same for the spring. So you can multiply that by 3 to have an idea if your financial aid is enough to cover your tuition for the entire year. And so the process of accepting this is really just clicking the green arrows on the right-hand side and at the very end, submitting your financial aid notification. Um, there isn't really, how can I say, there isn't really any information on here as to whether this is going to be enough to cover you. But what I always recommend that students do is that you look at your FAN and that you look at your Bruin bill, right? Because by now your Bruin bill reflects your total cost for the fall quarter. So if I were a student, I'd say, okay, my tuition is $5,558 for the quarter and for the fall only, because remember, although we award you for the whole year, we only work in quarters. So if I were this student, or this was my financial aid notification, and these are all of the awards that I was offered, at the very bottom, I can see that I was offered 21,298 in the fall quarter. That's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of money. My cost is really 5,558. So you have to pay close attention to the core, which are student loans, the very top, which are grants. Grants are funds that do not have to be repaid, and I'll get into that a little bit in the next few slides. But grants is free money that does not have to be repaid, so you want to accept those. Scholarships as well. Loans and work study are completely different. But when it comes to just accepting funding, we always want to make sure that you accept any scholarships or grants that were offered to you, because that's money that does not have to be repaid and it's money that you are eligible for the academic year. So it's also important that after you indicate whether you want to accept the funds or not, that you submit your financial aid notification, because unless you submit, your FAN will stay in sort of cyberspace, just reviewed but not accepted, right? And so in order for us to actually have the funds as accepted or declined, we need to receive your submission. Also, anytime that we adjust your aid, the system will send you a new financial aid notification. And every FAN supersedes the previous. Some students only have one transaction. Some students have 10 transactions. It just really depends, right? So if you were to say to our office, I don't want to accept my loans, please cancel them for me. We'll go ahead and cancel them for you. And then in a matter of 48 hours, the system is going to send you an updated FAN showing that your loans have been canceled. And so, like I said before, my UCLA, and in this case, your FAN transactions are the official form of communication between our office and you, informing you of just your financial aid status. One of the questions that I always get is, well, do I need to accept my loans, and is there a deadline by when I have to submit my FAN? And the answer is no, there's no deadline. But if you are wanting to have your financial aid ready to be dispersed by our disbursement date, and if this were a month ago, I would say to make sure that you either complete your FAN, either accept or decline your awards, or complete any other missing documents no later than September 1st. Because by now, or at least by this weekend, all of the FANs that have been completed are the ones that we're going to start processing and getting ready to disperse on Monday. And we will continue to disperse funds every day after, but encouraging students to have their file completed at least by the very first disbursement is always a good idea, because as some of you may know, there are deadlines by when your balance has to be paid. Otherwise, there is a possibility that you could be dropped from your courses. So you always want to make sure that you pay close attention to those deadlines listed on your Bruin bill, or just listed on our website, or listed on any other payment office that is key, a key to you. So one of the things I also want to mention about student loans are completely different than grants and scholarships. They do have to be repaid. And in order for you to actually receive the loans that were offered to you, there are two additional requirements that need to be completed. Right? One of them is a master promissory note, and the other is loan entrance counseling, specifically if you were offered federal loans. If you were offered university loans, you also have additional requirements that you need to complete, and one of them is also a master promissory note, and the requirement to complete that will be listed on your MyUCLA account, right? So like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you go through the entire process of reviewing your FAN and then submitting everything at the end. On our website, if you were to go to our website, which is financialaid.ucla.edu, on the left-hand side under the news and happenings column, we actually have a link to a tutorial video that goes over a lot of the information that I just covered on how to understand and read your FAN. So in case you have any additional questions, you can always refer to the video, and the video goes over some of the information that I just covered. But again, remember, I think that the best tool is to look at your FAN, to look at your Bruin bill and say, okay, was I offered enough financial aid for the fall to cover my Bruin bill? Okay, so today is September the 18th, right? We're getting close to the 21st. After you accept your funds, essentially what begins to happen is that all of that information starts to come into our system. 10 days before the start of the quarter, we disperse your funds from our system onto your Bruin bill. They may appear, the funds may appear on your Bruin bill before the 10 days, but you won't actually see any of that money paid out until 10 days before the start of the quarter. The money or the funds will be applied towards your tuition first, and if any aid exceeds the cost of tuition, the funds will be refunded to you directly. Refunds take about 2 to 3 days to process if you are signed up for Bruin Direct. If you are not signed up for Bruin Direct, then the funds will be sent to you in a paper check. If you have a valid checking account, we encourage students to sign up for Bruin Direct because I think right now, just given that we are in a different time, waiting for the mail to deliver your check can be a little difficult, if not lengthy. And if you're from out of town or if you're from out of state, having your check sent home when you're living close to UCLA or you're living elsewhere can be a little problematic if you're expecting to maybe use that check for whatever your cost may be for the academic year. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And then there's no deadline by when you have to do that, but I would probably say no later than today, because once the refund process starts to happen, I can't guarantee that signing up for Bruin Direct the same day when a refund is supposed to be issued can actually look or appear as available for your deposit. So please make sure you take the time to do that if you expect to receive a refund. Okay, so this is where we are. In order for you to continue to remain eligible, you do have to meet eligibility throughout your academic career at UCLA. And I'd like to start with the census date because the census date is something that can be missed. But essentially, the first 3 weeks of the start of the quarter, students have the ability to add and drop courses as needed. But by the 3rd week, our office has a process that we call census, where you have to actually be enrolled in the system in the number of classes that you need to be in for the quarter, right? At that point, the add drop period has ended and our office captures your enrollment on that date to determine your final eligibility for for the quarter. So when we disperse financial aid, depending, of course, on the financial aid that you qualify for, we assume that you're going to take 12 units or more, which is full time. If by the third week in the quarter we find out or our system captures you at maybe 4 units, your financial aid will be heavily adjusted because you had to be in your final units for the quarter. Assuming that you were supposed to be in 12 units, then of course we would adjust your aid. But if you knew all along that you were only going to be in 4 units, and when we estimated your eligibility, we estimated at 12, then you already know, and that's why I have this information here, that our office is going to adjust your financial aid. In terms of academic progress, we have a system or a policy that we call satisfactory academic progress, where we monitor your progress throughout your career at UCLA every year. And in order to remain eligible according to our progress requirements, you have to maintain at least a 2.0 GPA or more. You have to complete 67% of your units attempted every quarter, and you have to graduate within 150% of your program length. So the last one, I think, it really just depends on, a case-by-case scenario, because sometimes there's students who will double major, and so the formula can look a little bit different. But essentially, you have to graduate. You can't be at UCLA forever, but once you start becoming a super senior, I think that students who have been here maybe for their 5th year can start to see this type of information appear on their financial aid screens or on their eligibility, right? So our office will often send communication through My UCLA saying you are close to your maximum time frame. Remember to only take classes that are needed for your eligibility or for your career or for your major. And if at any point you receive a notice that says you are disqualified for financial aid because you have exceeded the maximum time frame, we do have an appeal process where students can appeal for their eligibility and explain, why students, or in this case, your situation has led you to exceed program length. And, I've sat on several committees where students will submit petitions, and a lot of the time is when I started school, I didn't know what to take, so I took a lot of different units. But now that I know what I'm supposed to take, I know that I'm on track to graduate, and I only have an X amount of units before I graduate. And here's an example of my remaining units. And so that's typically what an appeal would look like for a student who has been at UCLA or who has been enrolled longer than 5 years and is close to exceeding their program length. So just know that there are options. The goal is always that you are passing, that you are progressing, and that you are getting close to graduation. And then lastly, if you are a Cal Grant recipient, you will see information on your My UCLA account that probably says something along the lines of you having to take 15 units in order to remain eligible. I want to make sure that everyone understands what that means, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take 15 units. The California Student Aid Commission, which is the state of California, requires that our office inform all students that if you are a Cal Grant recipient, it is recommended that you take 15 units or more per quarter, because the Cal Grant program is available for only either 4 years if you're a new Cal Grant recipient, or 2 years if you are a transfer student and use your Cal Grant at your former school, right? So in order for you to graduate within that set amount of remaining eligibility, they recommend that you take 15 units or more per quarter. It doesn't mean that if you don't take 15 units, you're not going to be eligible. It just means that if you take less and after 2 years your grant runs out, the state of California is not going to extend your Cal Grant eligibility. It's a done deal, right? 2 years is what they promised you or what they said you were eligible for. And after that, the university would then, oftentimes, depending on funding, I can't guarantee that in 2 years from now this would be the case, but what often happens is the university fills your need with institutional funding, right? So something like the university grant which you might find information about that on our website, would be used to supplement that difference, right? And that's why the March 2nd deadline is key every single year. Whether you think you're going to qualify or not, you always want to make sure that you fill out that application by March 2nd. Like I mentioned before about the Cal Grant, if you are a Cal Grant recipient, you do have to submit a FAFSA or a DREAM map every single year by March 2nd. I think for some of you, if you were receiving a Cal Grant at a previous school, it is important that you transfer your Cal Grant with you. And our office has been sending several notifications to students encouraging them to go on to the California Student Aid Commission and fill out the G6 form. The G6 form is the transfer entitlement form where essentially you transfer your Cal Grant information with you to UCLA. So please make sure that if you received an email from our office saying that you should transfer your Cal Grant, that you complete the requirements so that your Cal Grant can be transferred to our office. The common grant that you might see on your financial aid notification is the federal Pell Grant. The federal Pell Grant is available to students who fill out a FAFSA, and the maximum award for the academic year is $6,195. This amount is based on your expected family contribution and, of course, your enrollment. So going back to the conversation about maintaining eligibility, if you decide to take less than 12 units because of your own reasons, your federal Pell Grant is one of the grants that will be heavily adjusted because your eligibility for the amount is dependent on your course load and then, of course, on your expected family contribution. If you do not fill out a FAFSA and you fill out a DREAM app, then you also have similar funding. The naming convention is a little bit different. I think we call it DREAM Pell, but the requirements are still the same. Depending on your expected family contribution and then depending on your enrollment, your grant would be adjusted as well if you decide to take the less than 12 units. Institutional funding is, of course, our university grant and our UC-ship. Also, we have a different funding, which some of you may have been recipients of the Regent Scholarship. The funding will vary from student to student, and it will vary from academic year to academic year, right? So I think sometimes students want to know what their eligibility will look like for their entire career or attendance at UCLA. And sometimes that's kind of difficult to predict because eligibility for financial aid has to do with your financial aid application, right? And depending on what you report on your financial aid application, then your eligibility could look different from year to year. So it's kind of difficult to estimate that for you, but essentially, if you know that your financial aid status is going to remain the same, then the type of financial aid that you have is a good sort of gauge of knowing this is what your financial aid package will look like for the upcoming academic year. Like I mentioned before, part of your financial aid award includes educational loans and work study. Student loans are designed to help you meet your educational expenses. You are not obligated to accept any loans, but if you do need to borrow a loan to cover the tuition costs, or to cover your housing, or to cover your books, or to cover any other expenses that you might have, we encourage you to consider the loans that we offered you so that you can help meet your expenses. If you were eligible for work study and we offered you work study, I mean, unfortunately, this year is very different as well than normally, but work study is a grant that is a little bit different than the other grants that you may have been offered. In order for you to receive or to actually receive the work study that you were offered, one, you would have to accept the funds. Two, you would need to look for a job. Three, you would have to be interviewed and hired. And then, of course, lastly, you would need to perform the duties of the job in order for you to earn the funding that was offered to you. So federal work study or just institutional work study is a grant where you have to actually work to earn the funds that were sent or offered to you. And as you go to work and you perform the job functions, you're essentially earning the funds that you accepted and that were offered to you. And I said unfortunately because I don't actually have an idea of what the job opportunities are going to look like. I know that they're going to be very different that they have been in the past, and they're going to be limited. You know, there's not going to be as many considering that the campus isn't open right now. But in the future, you know, traditionally, students are able to accept their work study and look for a job on campus. If you accept your work study and you don't find a job or you decide not to work, that's totally fine as well. You have until the early winter to find a job if you accepted your work study offer. If not, then our office is going to cancel those funds and clean up your account in order for us to have an idea of who actually earned the funds and who didn't earn the funds and whatnot. So um, I don't encourage you to consider work study in your overall calculation on how much financial aid you could potentially count on to cover your expenses, because work study is of course different. You actually have to work to earn the funds that were offered to you. Okay. So if you are in a situation where your financial aid application no longer reflects your eligibility, because, you know, let's be realistic, these applications are filled out with information from 2 years ago, right? So if you applied for financial aid for the upcoming academic year, the financial aid information that you used was from 2018, right? And we all know that a lot has happened from 2018 to this very day, right? Unfortunately, people have lost their jobs, people maybe have lost parents, a lot of different things have happened. So if you are in a situation like that, you can go to our website, and under the appeals tab, we have a lot of different information. But some of the most common appeals that I find are helpful to know is the projected income appeal. Because this is basically the student saying to our office, the income information that I reported on my financial aid application is no longer a true reflection of my current access to financial resources. So please reconsider my financial aid eligibility based on my current status, right? So that's what the projected income appeal form means. And depending on if you are a dependent student or you're under the age of 24, then you would want to submit one for your parents if your parents were the ones who were affected, or one for yourself if you are an independent student. Those are the two appeals that you will find on our website. The third common appeal is the independent appeal. And this is typically for students who do not have access to parental information and cannot complete their financial aid application, because the application requires that if you are under a certain age and you're considered a dependent student, that you provide certain information about your parents in order to complete your application. So if you are in a circumstance where you don't have access to parental information, we do have an independent appeal on our website. And then lastly, I understand that when students fill out their financial aid application, there's a lot of opportunity to sometimes enter information incorrectly. It happens. It happens all the time. Sometimes students will report their parents' income as their income, right? Sometimes students will report the house they live in because their parents are homeowners as an asset, when clearly you don't have to do that, because the home you live in should not be considered an asset. Sometimes students will incorrectly report tax information because, you know, the FAFSA or the DREAM app is complicated. Sometimes there's just a lot of room for error, and I understand, and we understand the pressure to have to do this right, because it could potentially affect your eligibility. If you know that you made a mistake and you incorrectly reported information that didn't need to be reported, we do have a special circumstance appeal. There isn't an actual appeal form that you need to fill out, but you would have to write a statement explaining what your special circumstances are and where the mistake happened when you completed your application, and how that information is really not true. And submit attached supporting documentation, submit that information to our office. and then have us review that information so that we can reconsider your eligibility or determine if the special circumstance that you are presenting is something that we will consider. Right? So there's no deadline by when you need to do any of these appeals, but like I said, before, uh, in theory, most students submit these type of appeals shortly after they are admitted because these are the type of appeals that could change your eligibility. And students want to know the type of financial aid that they could qualify for if they decide to attend the university. So in your case, and I think that submitting it as soon as possible before the following academic year is always a great idea, especially project appeal because it could determine just how much financial you can possibly see for the upcoming year and can ease some kind of distress in knowing that, okay, yes, you are going to receive more funding. Also, if you didn't know about the projected income appeal, we still accept those. We accept them throughout the year. We accept all of these documents throughout the year. Just know that there are resources available to you. And like I said before, our office is in partnership with you. We are here to guide you, to assist you, and to explain what some of this stuff means. And our website has all of this information listed. You can take a look at the appeals. But if there's one more thing I'm going to say is that when you are submitting any of these appeals, you always want to make sure that you submit everything completely signed, dated with your student ID number so that we can consider your submission complete and move forward in the review process. Okay. And then, of course, our campus partners. By now, some of you might be familiar with these folks in Murphy Hall. So we are all in the same in the same building. But the Student Accounts Office is the group of people who oversee the Bruin payment plan, Bruin bill, your refunds, and your tuition. So we think that familiarizing yourself with where the Student Accounts Office is or their contact information is key in understanding the services that they provide and whether you should be contacting them in case you don't see something reflected on your Bruin bill that you were supposed to see, like let's just say a scholarship or whatnot. Okay, so the Student Accounts Office is them. The Registrar's Office is the group of folks who oversee the residency eligibility, right? So they have a deputy registrar. If you are a non-resident student, then you might be familiar with the Registrar's Office. They are the folks who determine your residency, whether you're an in-state student or an out-of-state student, right? And our office doesn't really interact with that type of information because they are pretty strict on the information that they like to gather and then also just determining eligibility. I don't know if there's any students on here who are not from California, but I know that we always get a question about how can I establish California residency. And if you go to the registrar's website, you'll find that they have a lot of different requirements and there's a lot of different pieces of information that our office feels is best not to try to get ourselves involved with because it's a lot. And we always just recommend that for any questions that you have about your residency or how to establish residency, that you visit the registrar's office and that you read through all of the requirements that they have on their website to understand that. Now, if you are granted residency mid-year, because let's just say it took a while for your paperwork to be processed, then your awards will be retroactively adjusted and you will be reconsidered for just the different funding that you may be eligible for, depending on when your file is completed. And then lastly, payment solutions and compliance. If you are expecting an outside scholarship from, I don't know, the Boys and Girls Club or Coca-Cola or anybody, just know that it goes to the Payment Solutions and Compliance Office. They are the cashier's office of the university, so they cash all the checks that are received. If you have outside funding or if for some reason you have just any questions about a check that you were expecting but you don't see it reflected on your Bruin bill, they are the folks that you should be contacting about that. okay? So not the financial aid office. If you have any additional questions after this presentation or just throughout your fall quarter, you can go to our website. You can look for this icon and you will be able to access a list of videos on how to navigate through a lot of the information that I just covered. Okay. Additional resources that are helpful: California Student Aid Commission, the folks who will receive the Cal Grant program, our office, and then of course the Department of Education if you want some additional information about those loans. Lastly, questions. I think I went over my time, but I'm trying to leave some time for some questions. So Reggie, are we ready or?
Yes, I can go ahead and get started on the first question that we received in the chat. So one of them was, when is the deadline to enroll in the Bruin pay plan?
I think it's Sunday. So if you were to go onto your My UCLA account, or even on the slide where I shared the link to the student accounts office, they have information on there about the Bruin pay plan, and the deadline, I want to say, is Sunday, September 20th.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then our next question is, can I get a work study job when I'm not living on campus?
Yes, you can. You can get a work study job. The question is, are there any that meet your eligibility? Not your eligibility, but your qualifications, right? So like I mentioned, the jobs available this academic year are going to look very different than they have in the past. Some jobs may not require that you live on campus. And so then the answer is yes, you can find a job even if you don't live on campus.
Great, thank you. And then our next question, which was just recently posted in the chat, is I was wondering if I can use my financial aid money to purchase a computer at the UCLA bookstore.
Okay, so the answer is yes, but it depends on what you mean by using your financial aid money, because there are two options. So the first option is our office dispersing your financial aid, paying for your tuition, issuing you a refund, and then you use your refund to buy your computer? The answer is yes. Once you receive your refund after your tuition is paid, the money that you receive, you can do whatever you want with, because at that point, that money is designed for you to cover your educational expenses. If that means purchasing a computer, then great, they could do that. The other option that I know some students do is they go to the bookstore before we disperse funds and they purchase a computer and they charge it to their account. At that point, your financial aid refund process won't always apply to cover those charges. Depending on the charge, it could cover your computer purchase, but just know that if you were expecting a larger refund, your refund will now be reduced because a large portion of it was used to cover your computer purchase. Matter of fact, sometimes there's cases where students don't receive a refund because they didn't have enough money to cover their tuition in the first place. Right? So at that point, they're still in the deficit because now on top of the tuition, they have a computer purchase balance. So two different scenarios, but the answer is yes.
Okay, great. And then our next question is, did you have any information about what does the Bruin Tech grant look like, if it's going to be reinstated for the upcoming academic year?
No, to my knowledge right now, the Bruin Tech grant is not currently available. But if there is additional funding, then we will make that funding available. And the information will be on our website.
Okay, great. And then one more question. Are there resources to look for work-study jobs off campus?
There are resources on our website under the undergraduate tab. You can click on, I think it says work, study, and jobs. And there is, a lot of different information on there about who some of our off-campus partners are. We don't offer just off-campus opportunities with anybody, they do have to be a campus partner in order for you to work and earn the work study funding through them.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I believe that's all the questions I have. If any of my other moderators have questions, please feel free to ask.
I do want to say one more thing in terms of the appeals, and it's only because it's new information, but in the next few days, possibly at the beginning of October, we are going to post a new appeal called the CARES Appeal. And it's for students who have experienced just different challenges due to the pandemic, COVID. So I would encourage all of you to look out for that, so that if you currently have just different needs, it's an opportunity for you to receive some additional funding that is specific to COVID. So it's going to be called the Fall CARES Appeal, and you'll find it under our Forms and Publication section. If you were to go on there now and you click under the Summer 2020 tab, if any of you were enrolled in the summer, you can definitely submit the summer version. But if you're not and you're starting in the fall, we will have a similar opportunity in the fall where you can fill that out and excuse me, receive additional funding.
Then I believe one more. For the message center, do you know like any tips or tricks like in terms of getting in contact with someone for financial aid?
That's a great question. I mean, they're all great questions. And I think, right now, between this year is just so unique, but this month, the month of August and September are our peak months, right? We have a high volume of paperwork, we have a high volume of message centers. So unfortunately, the length of time that it takes for us to respond can often be a little bit longer than our usual time. But depending on why you are contacting us, I would encourage you to pay close attention to the queue that you are submitting your request. So if you are attaching paperwork, or if you are submitting paperwork, you want to make sure specifically like the housing adjustment form, you want to make sure that it goes specifically to the queue that you're supposed to be sending it. If you're just sending a general question, always make sure that your student ID is listed and that you are pretty explicit in the message that you are sending, so that we can do our best to assist you with the information that you present us with. But other than that, no. I mean, our message center right now is the best way to contact our office. And then also during our office hours, which, as some of you might know, are really busy because there's a lot of students who are trying to reach us right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we had. Thank you so much again for answering all those questions and putting together this presentation for us this morning, and all the incoming transfer students who will find this information helpful.
No problem. I'm glad I could help, and I hope my